Welcome all. Today I will be talking about The Voice of the Silence, a manual for mystics, and I'll be focusing on Fragment I. This is the second part of my lecture. The first lecture I focused on the preface, on the introduction to the Voice of the Silence. Today I will talk about Fragment I, purification, separation, and the kiss on the feet. Guidance, the three halls, high-siddhis, memory, recollection, and the path. The methodology outlined in Fragment I by HPB, which includes passive state and the 5 hindrances, the voice of the silence, and the invocation to the soul. So, Fragment I of the Voice of the Silence basically focuses on a process of purification, also on a process of rupture, of the breaking of a status quo, in other words, of a change in terms of way of living, a change from a person who was living a life in ignorance of its divine nature and wants to start living a life connected with its divine nature. In this sense, it's a rupture, a breaking with the previous status quo, which was living in ignorance. As we saw during my first lecture, Bernard Clairvaux, he refers to 3 kisses: the kiss on the feet, the kiss on the hands, and the kiss on the lips. And I mentioned that the kiss on the feet is linked to the first fragment of the Voice of the Silence, because this fragment is linked, it focuses on our physical body, on the way that we live and see the world, and so on. And in the same fragment, HPB also mentions that we need to wash our feet in the waters of renunciation. This is the whole, this fragment is the whole of ignorance, avidya, blindness, blindness in relation to the divine nature. It is the place where those who do not know, do not perceive, do not see, and do not understand find themselves. Fragment I offers guidance, methodology, and ethical precepts one should follow and practice in order to move from ignorance to knowledge, from avidya to vidya, and then to know, to perceive, to see, to understand. The guidance that we find in Fragment I has many layers, and it's not possible during one lecture to cover all of it. So today I will focus on the high-siddhis, on the spiritual memory, on the path, and with the idea of replacing the fleeting by the everlasting. We will also discuss the methodology, which is developing concentration, silence in the mind, open quote, says the Voice of the Silence, silence thy thoughts, and fix thy whole attention on thy master, whom yet thou dost not see, but whom thou feel. By thy master, HPB refers to the soul. And then she also explains how can we make and establish this connection with our higher self and our soul. And she outlines a number of ethical precepts that we should try to apply in our everyday life to facilitate this process. I will have no time to discuss the ethical precepts, but one of them being compassion. Well, in terms of guidance, Fragment 1 begins by explaining to us that there are 3 states of consciousness. These 3 states of consciousness, HPB refers to as the 3 halls. And she says, open quote, 3 halls or weary pilgrim lead to the end of toils. These halls, O conqueror of Mara, will bring thee through 3 states into the 4th and thence into the 7 worlds, the worlds of eternal rest. So the first hall is linked to Fragment 1. It is called Jagrat, the waking. Is consciousness related to the physical and material existence. And in the same way that we cannot see within our physical body, for example, we cannot see our heart functioning and our inner organs, we cannot see within our minds. So the waking consciousness is not aware of its divine nature. It sees only what is material. It's entertained only by material things. And this is linked to our presence in the physical world and again to our feet, because we walk this earth on our feet. The second stage of consciousness is related to Fragment 2, which we will not discuss today. It's Vapana, the dreaming state. And the third state of consciousness, Sushputi, is linked to Fragment 3, which is the state of deep sleep consciousness. Then, after that, the aspirant enters the 4th stage, which is the Turiya, that's the stage beyond the dreamless state. Now, in terms of guidance, we will discuss a bit about the siddhis. Fragment 1 opens with the following statement. These instructions are for those ignorant of the dangers of the lower Idi. Idi is a Pali Sanskrit, a Pali word which means siddhis in Sanskrit. And Theosophists, they are familiar with that. Siddhis, we often translate them in the Theosophical literature as psychic and spiritual powers. There are lower siddhis and higher siddhis. The lower siddhis, they are linked to psychic powers, and the higher siddhis to spiritual ones. In Fragment 1, HPB also, of course, in relation to the siddhis, she mentions, I think 3-4 times, Kundalini. She says, let the fiery power retire into the innermost chamber, the chamber of the heart, and the abode of the world's mother. From the heart, that power shall rise into the 6th, the middle region, the place between thine eyes. So, HPB refers to Kundalini in Fragment 1 in a number of different ways. She calls Kundalini as the fiery power, as the world's mother, and as the mystical power. So what is the first, let's say, consequence that the practitioner will face as a result of his spiritual practices in light of HPB's teachings? It will be the awakening of siddhis, both in a first instance of lower siddhis. And what are these siddhis? Let's discuss a bit more about them. Let me see something. Now, here, this second statement in which she says, let the fiery power retire into the innermost chamber, the chamber of the heart, she says that this power that we know as Kundalini should find its way to the chakra of the heart. And from there to ascend to the chakra of the middle eye. Okay, so she's talking in Fragment I about a process of awakening, the awakening of Kundalini as a result of spiritual practices, of how and where this energy should be directed to the chamber of the heart. And that's why she focused so much on compassion. And what happens after this energy, Kundalini, is in the chamber of the heart, where it goes, and then what happens afterwards. Now, if Kundalini is awake as a result of meditation and some spiritual practices, there are two sorts of siddhis, according to the Theosophical literature and the Buddhist and the Hinduist literature. There are the lower siddhis and the higher siddhis. For example, in the Bhagavata Purana, which is a Shivaist text, I'm not going to discuss the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, in which he presents 8 different siddhis. I think Martin Leidman focuses on this in his lecture. So I decided to focus on the Bhagavata Purana. The 5 spiritual siddhis, the Bhagavata Purana, are knowing the past, present, and the future. This first siddhi is very important, both in the Buddhist literature and in the Theosophical one. According to K.H. in the Mahatma letters, he says that one of the most important spiritual siddhis that the disciple must awake is the ability to remember his past lives. He mentions also that many of his disciples have been lost because they have died and they reincarnate again without having the ability to remember the past life. This is an idea also very much supported in the Buddhist tradition, that we should develop or awaken this spiritual siddhi. And the spiritual siddhi is not lost. It's taken from one incarnation to another, while the psychic siddhis linked to our personality, they are lost from one incarnation to another. Now, there are a number of other siddhis. As you can see, there are high spiritual siddhis: tolerance of heat and cold, knowing the mind of others, and so on. And there are the 10 secondary or lower siddhis, spiritual powers, which is being undisturbed by hunger and bodily appetites, clairaudience, clairvoyance, astral projection, shape-shifting, entering the body of others. This is something that it was in the Theosophical literature. HPB, she says that she was a tulku for the Mahatmas. So Olcott, he describes the way that HPB was writing Eyes Unveiled, how she changed her personality, how many times she was passing her hand in her face like she had a beard or something. And what is tulku? Tulku is the ability of a living person to use the body of someone else. This is tulku. And then control over life and death, witnessing and participating in the pastime of the gods. I'm not sure what that means, and so on. So basically, just to give you a general idea about what the siddhis are and why HPB opens the first line of the Voice of the Silent saying that we should be aware. These instructions are for those ignorant of the dangers of the lower ED. She considers the lower psychic powers, let's say, as illusionary, as dangerous, because not because they are danger in the sense of being danger, but because they can, someone may get carried away by the experiences derived from these lower cities. Someone may be carried away and forget that the main goal is the union with the soul, with our higher self, and not psychic experiences. Now, in terms of guidance, another very important element in Fragment I is memory. First of all, when we discussed the introduction, and I mentioned a lot of things related to the preface, I forgot to mention the importance of memory. HPB, for example, claims to have memorized the fragments that we read in the voice of the silence. So without her memorizing those fragments, we would not have this material. And then she talks about the memory in different ways in Fragment I. For example, she says, one single thought about the past that you left behind, and this will drag you down, and you will have to start the entire process from the beginning again. Kill in thyself all memory of past experiences. Look not behind, or thou art lost. What does that mean? Kill in thyself all memory of past experiences. However, you will see that in the voice of the silence, HPB also says that we should remember, we should develop the city that allows us to remember our past lives. So on one side, she says that we should forget our past experiences, and on the other, that we should remember. What is this? Well, she's referring here that we should forget about our life, live the life that we have lived in ignorance of our divine nature. Not our experiences in itself, but living in ignorance of our divine nature. This is what we should forget. Now, she mentions again memory in a different way now. She says, before the soul can comprehend and may remember, she must unto the silent speaker be united, just as the form to which the clay is modeled is first united with the potter's mind. For then the soul will hear and will remember, and then to the inner ear will, I'm sorry, my dogs, the voice of the silence. So now she's referring here again to memory, to remember. Now, to remember what? This is a very Platonic comment. Well, to remember our divine nature. To remember that we have a divine origin and not simple a material one. And then she mentions again memory when she talks about remembering, when she discusses about the three halls or the three states of consciousness. She says, "Oh, weary pilgrim, lead to the end of toils." No, she says, "Three halls, oh, weary pilgrim, lead to the end of toils. Three halls will bring thee through these three states." I have read this statement again. I do not read it. I need to read it again. But she says, the words of rest eternal, you should learn their names. You should hear and remember. Anyway, she's telling us that we must learn by heart these teachings and the names of the halls which we just saw in the previous slides, and we should remember. So the memory is something very, very important in the voice of the silence. But what is most important and more important than the physical memory or trying to memorize teachings is the spiritual memory. The art of memory is linked to the potential of inner transformation and change. In Vedanta, for example, there are 3 types of memories. Smriti, which means literally that which is remembered, and that a body of Hindu texts usually attributed to an author, traditionally written down, and Shrutis, which is the Vedic literature considered authorless, based on direct experience that's transmitted from mouth to ear. In Buddhism, there are different types of memories also. There is the memories of past lives, as we were discussing, the memorization of sacred texts. There is the memorization of vast volumes and the reduction of those volumes into highly condensed mnemonic devices. And there is a process of meditation involving concentration and visualization of an object. The object to be kept in mind needs to be remembered. And we could go on about it. Plato also, he mentions very highly, he refers in a very enthusiastic way, let's say, about Mnemosyne, which you can see here. She is the mother of the muses, and her name means remembrance. It's said that in Hades, there are 2 rivers. There are other rivers, but there are also 2 very important rivers. One of them is Lith, which is the river of forgetfulness, and Mnemosyne, which is the river of remembrance. So in the Orphic mysteries, when someone was dying, they usually were drawing a map and putting on the body of the deceased for him to find his way to the water, to drink from the waters of Mnemosyne in the underworld. So he would remember his divine nature, and he would reach the Eleusinian fields in an easier way. There was also nearby this river, the river of Let, forgetfulness, which they were advised not to touch it. HPB also refers to the river of Lith in the following way in the Key to Theosophy. She says that when we incarnate in the physical world, we are diving into the waters of Lith, because we forget everything related to our divine origin. So memory is a very, very important element in the voice of the silence. Another important element emphasized in Fragment I is the notion of the path. The notion of the path is a notion very influential in the Theosophical literature in general, and it's written in the voice of the silence. There is but one road to the path. At its very end alone, the voice of the silence can be heard. This path is mentioned in all the mystic works, says HPB. As Krishna says in Gnānesvāri, when this path is beheld, whether one sets out to the bloom of the east or to the chambers of the west, without moving, O holder of the bowl, is the traveling in this road, in this path to whatever place one would go, that place one's own self becomes. So HPB quotes this in the Fragment I, and which basically says that we are the path. When we start treading it, we become the path. And says again, one cannot tread the path until one becomes the path. To become the path, it is necessary to destroy the lunar body, says HPB, the astral form produced by the kamic principle, the kamarupa, or body of desire. Also to cleanse and paralyze the manasa rupa, lower mind. It's very interesting, this statement, because notice that she uses the word to paralyze. To paralyze means that we should get into a passive state, which we will discuss later on. And she also says the ladder by which the candidate ascends is formed of ranks of suffering and pain. This can be silenced only by the voice of virtue. Yeah? Thou hast to lave thy feet in waters of renunciation. And then we see here again that she's remembering us that we are trying to begin, let's say, our spiritual journey, our conscious reunion with our soul. And then we have to approach our life in the material world, in our physical body, in a different way. There is this koan, this Zen koan, which I found very interesting. It says, Joshua asked Nansen, what is the path? And he said, everyday life is the path. Joshua asked, can it be studied? Nansen said, if thou try to study, you will be far away from it. Joshua asked, if I do not study, how can I know it is the path? Nansen said, the path does not belong to the perception world, neither does it belong to the non-perception world. Cognition is a delusion, and non-cognition is senseless. If you want to reach the true path beyond doubt, place yourself in the same freedom as the sky. You name it neither good nor not good. So he's talking basically about a condition in which we live a state of duality, in which we think there is evil and there is good, in which we put ourselves beyond this, beyond duality, and try to see things from a different perspective. Now, the methodology. Well, Fragment I has a lot of tips on what method we should use to achieve this union with our soul. The first one, for example, is pratyahara, which is withdrawal. Withdrawal from the organ of the senses to become indifferent to the objects of perception. And the voice of the silence says, open quote, close thy senses against the great dire heresy of separateness. What can we understand from this? The reading is that perception, sensorial perception, occurs within a mental process involving duality, and that we have separation, and that we have to go beyond this sensorial perception in order to see things not in a dual way. And she says, open quote, seek out the raga of the senses, the thought producer. he who awakes illusion. And then the second method, we have to develop harmony. We must be peaceful, tranquil, to achieve a state of inner tranquility in order to establish this link with our soul. And she says, kill thy desires, make vices impotent. Silence the mind. And she says, silence thy thoughts and fix thy whole attention on thy master. When she says thy master, she's referring to our soul, to our higher self. Then she again is saying that we should move beyond this sense of perception in order to achieve this higher state of consciousness. And she says, reach a passive state. Regain the child state you have lost. Overcome the 5 impediments, hindrances. We will be discussing about it. Awaken compassion. Open quote, let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. Kill love of life, or try to enslave Tanya. This is Tanya. I don't think anyone really, any being can enslave Tanya, because if you look into the secret doctrine, Tanya is the thirst of life. But if you open and study the first 3 stanzas of the secret doctrine, you will see that one of the reasons HPB gives for existence, for the manifestation of the cosmos itself, is Tanya. It's the thirst for life. So this is something much deeper. Develop dharana. Dharana is concentration. Practice dhyana, meditation, contemplation, to reach samadhi. Samadhi is that condition of oneness with the object of meditation. That condition which transcends duality. I don't know how many minutes. I cannot see what time is it. Just a minute. Yeah. Now, reach a passive state. She says, O disciples, unless the flesh is passive, head cool, the soul as firm and pure as flaming diamonds, the radiance will not reach the chamber. Strive with thy thoughts unclean before they overpower thee. What is she talking about? The radiance is another term she uses for Kundalini. Yeah? And she says, unless there is an inner state of peace, tranquility, and the thoughts are pure, Kundalini will not reach the heart. Yeah? So she's talking about a purification process that must occur when we are engaged into spiritual practices, and that the union with the soul, with our higher self, occurs when we reach a passive state. In other words, when all the movements of thoughts and feelings, they are calm and they have stopped, and they are like a lake without movement and peaceful and all that. Now, again on the passive state, she says, the light from the one master, she's talking about our soul, the one unfading golden light of spirit. shoots its effulgent beams on the disciple from the very, very first time. So she's telling us that our soul on the other side is trying to connect with us. However, for this connection to occur, we must be passive, the head cool, the soul as firm and pure as a flaming diamond. The radiance will, okay, I'm repeating this again. I have mentioned this before. We jump to the next. And she says, withhold thy mind from all external objects, all external sights. Withhold internal images. She's again telling us, look, if you want to unite yourself with your soul, you have to practice contemplation or meditation, and you have to try to reach a stage where the perception, the objects of perception, they will be not moving in our mind and in yourself. And she says that we have to master the 5 impediments. What are the 5 impediments? They are sensory desire, feelings based on the pleasures of the 5 senses, that we need to master that. Ill will, feelings based on anger, resentment, hostility, bitterness, etc. And 3, sloth torpor is a dull, morbid state that is characterized by lack of energy and opposition to wholesome activity. By a lack of energy, it's missing the lack there, and opposition to wholesome activity. So opposition to actions that they base it on a non-dual way of seeing things. Restlessness, worry. The mind that is agitated is unable to settle down. Doubt. Finally, this is something that's very interesting, because the Mahatmas, they mention in their letters that doubt is like a poison. So they mention the need of faith. That's very important in Buddhism in general, this notion. Now, I'm finishing very soon this presentation. The importance of the sound, all right? Because the title of the book is The Voice of the Silence. Let's see some quotes. The music, says Claude Debussy, is the silence between the notes. Music is the silence between the notes. Before you speak, it is necessary for you to listen, for God speaks in the silence of the heart. Through the sound of Om, we see the reflection of our own nature, Yoga Sutras. We may listen to our inner self and still not know which ocean we hear roaring, Martin Buber. The music in the soul can be heard by the universe, Lao Tzu. So you see that the sound is very, very, very important, and it's very important in the voice of the silence also. In which we find the following quote: he who would hear the voice of nada, the soundless sound, and comprehend it, he has to learn the nature of dharana, concentration. The soundless sound, or the soundless voice, is the voice of the silence, which is linked to the notion of nada, which is a Sanskrit word to refer to an unstruck sound. And here HPB mentions some sounds, right? So before we start treading the spiritual path, she says, we will listen the mystic sounds in 7 different ways. The first is like the nightingale's sweet voice. The second is like a silver cymbal. The third is like the ocean sprite is imprisoned in its shell. The other one is like the chant of Vina. The fifth, like the sound of a bamboo flute. It changes next into a trumpet blast. And the last vibrates like the dull rumbling of a thundercloud. The seventh sound swallows all the other sounds. They die, and they are heard no more. She's again, and she mentions a lot of the times the importance of sound, of vibration in the voice of the silence. Here, for example, we have the Nada Bindu Upanishad, also focusing on the importance of the sound. And HPB, she refers to the Nada Bindu Upanishad in Fragment I. It says, the sound which he thus practices makes him deaf to all external sounds. He enters the Turiya state. In the beginning of his practice, he hears many loud sounds. At first, the sounds are like those proceeding from the ocean, clouds, cataracts. In the middle stage, those proceeding from mardala, a musical instrument, bell and horn. At the last stage, those proceeding from tinkling bells, flute, vina. Here, as you see, HPB mentions vina, and in the Nada Bindu, we also see the reference to vina and bees. And in other texts, we will also find reference to the hissing of snakes. Yeah. So why the sound is so important, we could ask. Yeah? The notion of sound is linked to vibration. Yeah? And in esotericism and in the Theosophical system and in many different traditions, it is believed that every human being has an inner sound of its own, that we have our particular note, which varies according to our temperament. Now, in the waking state, which is the state one finds himself, for example, according to HPB, when begins trying to tread the spiritual path, we cannot listen to any of these sounds, because in the waking state, we are linked to the material world and connected to the material world. And there are different types of sounds linked. Every person, they have different, according to the different traditions, different types of sounds, and they are linked to different principles. And the process of meditation involving stillness, for example, also is an attempt to try to listen to our inner sound, to our inner notes, and know the sounds, which is, according again to some traditions, within our hearts. I have a quote here, but I'm not going to read it. So the entire Fragment I of the Voice of the Silence is giving us methodologies, tips, and clues on what we should do to tread the spiritual path, and what we should do to connect with our higher self, with our soul. And this is something not easy. You see, for example, here, there is a quote from Jung, from the Red Book. I find this quote fascinating. He says, "My soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak, I call you. Are you there? I have returned. I'm here again. I have shaken the dust from all the lands from my feet, and I have come to you. I am with you. After long years of long wandering, I I have come back to you again. Should I tell you everything I have seen, experienced, and drunk in? Or do you not want to hear about all the noise of life and of the world? But one thing you must know, the one thing I have learned is that one must live this life. This life is the way, the long short way to the unfathomable, which we call divine. There is no other way. All other ways are false paths. I found the right way. It led me to you, to my soul. I returned, tempered and purified. Do you still know me? How long the separation lasted? Everything has become so different. And how did I find you? How strange my journey was. This quote from Jung is very, very touching. And it shows his struggle into trying to, that he has struggled. He struggled to connect himself with his soul, and he reached that mystical union, we could say. And he's having a dialogue with his soul, with his higher self. And the entire aim, let's say, of Fragment I is to help the aspirant to move on from the waking consciousness, which is the consciousness that understands and sees and lives only the material world, to turn within and to connect with its soul, its higher self. And after that, there is the second stage, the second level of consciousness, which is explained in Fragment II. This is what I had to say. Thank you very much. I am stop sharing my screen and the opening for questions.